Oh, we've started. Does
We've
this mean
started.
we're live?
We're
Yes.
live.
All right, we
We're
are live.
Now we hijack and we talk about popcorn and dogs and kids and
Yeah.
stuff because no one wants to
Yeah.
hear about careers,
I
right?
know. Jennifer Hale, I haven't seen you in a bit. Well, first of all, I haven't been in a recording studio really much at all.
Yeah.
Everything's been from home, so
I've been
nobody's
in
seen
this
anybody.
one. I've been in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
I know. When was the
good
last?
to
I'm
see
thinking
you
the
both.
last time that I saw you. When would that be?
It was probably when I was working for Darragh at LucasArts. It might have been, unless we did some stuff while I was at Sony, but I think it's been, I can't remember. But when we were doing all the Clone Wars stuff, I felt like I saw you, every month. I'd pop down to LA and like, hi, Jennifer Hale.
Hi.
But it's good to see you both.
Yeah. Good
You
to see
too. Yeah. I've seen Jennifer a few times recently on one.
Yeah. We got stuff going on. I'm gonna pop on to Twitter and just pop it out there that we live now. Let's see if we're doing our thing right now.
We are
Aaron,
live.
welcome to the Inside of the Sausage, because here we are talking about stuff, and here I am, tweeting about it. Here we go. Let me quote this tweet and go live now, live. Now, yay! Live now. I put a question mark. I put a question mark instead of an exclamation point. I fixed it.
There are people out there. I see chat is beginning to populate.
Oh yeah, I see
Nice.
it too. I see it too.
Thanks. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So you brought up? Did you bring up the? You brought up the questions. Is that right, Jen?
I did. Okay, so the first one that we have here is, how did you get into the industry?
Oh, who wants to start?
What is your origin story?
I'll go. So decided I wanted to get into the entertainment business. So I basically hopped on a plane, moved to LA when I was 19, dropped out of school, got an illegal. I illegally got a legal Social Security card.
So your mom and dad were double thrilled.
which I then later on rectified to legalize my situation. But I started working for an animation company in LA who we were working on a show called Widget the World Watcher and Mr. Bogus. And was there for about 5 years and had a funny experience where there was one session we were supposed to record one of the shows, and neither of the two directors showed up. So Tress MacNeil was like, "Come on, Darragh, let's record this shit." And
Tress can be scare. She's super intense and brilliant.
Oh yeah, amazing. And so it was a who's who. It was Tress MacNeil, Russi Taylor, Jim Cummings. So we just started recording, and I was like, 24 maybe, I don't know, 23, 24.
You were a baby.
Yeah, so that was my first experience, and in and around that time, an old girlfriend at the time called me one day and she said, "Okay, I'm going to read you a job description. Don't interrupt me and tell me why you can't do the job." It was a voiceover director position at LucasArts, and so I cobbled together a bullshit resume, fired it off, and got a call, and then subsequently got flown up for like an 8-hour interview and got the job as a voice director in the LucasArts voice department. And it was in that capacity that obviously I met both of you. So that's my origin story.
That's amazing.
And voiceover was still still developing, this was a new art, right? This was a specialized.
Yeah, we were just transitioning from games being on the little 3.5-inch floppies and just moved to CD-ROMs, and so all of a sudden, of course, there was room on the disc, which is exactly what happened. So in the original like X-Wing and TIE Fighter,
I remember this.
Yeah, there really wasn't that much dialogue, and then all of a sudden, once we moved to the CD-ROM, it just opened everything up. So yeah, it was good. It's crazy. It's crazy to think that. God, that was 95. It's like, look at all the gray hairs.
My God, no. Hey, speak for yourself. I'm sporting mine. Oh my God, David, what's your origin story?
Me? Oh, I'm so confusing. I was a musical theater kid growing up, and Darragh has sat through one of my plays. We won't talk about that. And so No, but I was a musical theater kid. I was really into music. I was really into theater, and in my brain, they were kind of all one and the same. And I, of course, grew up at that time with Star Wars and Indiana Jones and E.T. and Jurassic Park and all those incredible movies with incredible sound and great music. And when I got into college, it was all about theater and music started slowly taking over my life. I had played in a lot of bands growing up, so we were out of recording studios, trying to get a record deal, all that stuff when I was a teenager. This was all in the early 90s, and when at the time, Star Wars was starting to come back, and I'd always been such a huge fan. And I remember playing those video games, not in my dorm room, because I didn't even have a computer at my freshman year in college. I kept borrowing my friends, and he'd get so annoyed because I'd be on his computer playing Dark Forces or X-Wing or TIE Fighter or whatever. And he's like, get off, And so I became very aware of LucasArts and video games. Was lucky enough to get an internship at Skywalker Sound in 1999 on their scoring stage right out of college at Berklee College of Music. And then after about a year, applied to games, got in as a sound assistant, and that's how I met Darragh. And on the voiceover side of things, it was Peggy Bartlett, if you remember Peggy, Darragh, that was sending out emails saying, anyone who wants to do a scratch voice in a game, just shoot me an email and I'll schedule like a 30-minute slot, and you could read scratch dialogue. And I did that, of course. And the theater thing that I was trying to suppress while I was pretending to be a sound expert, which I was not, I was just in my 20s trying to figure out everything. Just it all came out in front of the mic. And so eventually I tried so hard not to bother Darragh, because I'm like, just play it cool, just be cool. Don't be that guy, because everyone wants to be that person, ultimately, after a few years, I started voice directing for Darragh, and he started me with like doing Stormtroopers and Aliens and things. And then I think my first voiceover job was Republic Commando in 2005. Anyway, worked under Darragh. He was my boss for for about a better part of a decade. And then in 2011, moved to PlayStation, worked there as a manager for about 4 years, then went freelance. Nowadays, I'm kind of in and out of the games business and into sort of the post-production business, working at Skywalker Sound in the animation space and some live action, and still doing voiceover. I played the dad in Boss Baby, if you've seen that on Netflix.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Timmy. Yeah. And then just a lot of Loop Group, a lot of Stormtroopers still. When Disney bought Lucasfilm and Star Wars, everything blew up again for Darragh as well. I'm sure for you as well. And some of my favorite memories were flying to LA with Darragh to record someone like you, doing all those Clone Wars games. And of course, you were amazing in Knights of the Old Republic and all of those things. So it was such a big experience for me. I was in my late 20s at the time I started voice directing, and I just fell in love with it. And the whole voiceover process in games. And of course, there's so much. Speaking of which, what about you?
I was sitting here thinking we have some similarities in our early origin story, because I started singing in clubs when I was 15, and music, and we took split paths. Music was all I wanted to do, and the whole same deal, going in studios, writing original songs, recording original songs, going out to play cover songs to make money to pay for the original song recordings, right? And the 2-inch tape, the whole thing, like, where's our tape? Who's got our tape? Did we pay for the thing so we can have our tape? The whole deal. Right. And then I remember, I started doing this when I was still a teenager. And for me, I think it was my early 20s. I had already finished university, but I was just insanely busy in my life. And I went, okay, I have to pick one of these, because my thinking at the time was like, there's not enough time. I think I was getting married for the first time or something. Did that a couple times, but, and I was like, I got to pick something. So music kind of went off to the side, and I've only lately begun to reclaim it. I released a couple songs last year, and once I've launched another venture a couple months ago, once that kind of gets on its where it can walk on its own, then I'll be going back into doing more, but I miss it greatly. But yeah, I started my origin story is out there, but let me see how brief I can get with it. I went to a fine arts high school. My mom was really particular about the way I spoke, so I could speak without a Southern accent. And I lived in Birmingham, Alabama, and I worked at a video production studio next to an audio studio, Batwell Studios. So they'd call me over to do voiceover, and I was stunned. I got paid for it, $30 or $35, and I put on my little capitalist piglet hat and went out and went door to door, cold calling ad agencies with my reel, and redoing my reel every couple months, because that part of the learning curve is so, it's so quick. Within 2 months, you're disgusted by your previous reel. Which is why I tell people, please don't make a reel in the beginning until the one you made 2 months ago no longer disgusts you, then pay someone else to do it. And from there I went to Atlanta, Georgia, because I hit the ceiling in Birmingham pretty quick. I had really owned a huge piece of the on-camera and voiceover commercial market, and still did theater and singing in clubs and stuff. And then in Atlanta, I got my first audition for a film role, and I was like, that's the acting style that makes sense to me. Okay, this is worth maybe spending a tiny bit less time in rock and roll for that. And that eventually took me out to LA, and that I had been in LA for, I think, 2 years doing the grind. I had just only ever made a living as an actor, aside after I stopped working at the video production house. First, there was the plant store. I think I was like 15 when I started that, and then the video production house. And then I became a full-time actor, supported myself through college and stuff. And LA was the first time I had to lie on my resume to get a waitressing job. Yes, I lied. Sorry. But it worked. I ended up as server trainer at that store, at that restaurant. But that didn't last too long, because one day I do like to follow my gut, and my gut said, make a voiceover tape. You know how to do this. And I just had this instinct that there were so many men on the air at the time, and men are awesome. Then there's also room for women. And there wasn't a lot of female presence in commercials and stuff at the time. And I was like, I can do this. I just knew how. And I just leaned into it as hard as I could. I took all the money I didn't have, found the best person in town for making reels. I did some research, and I spent all the money I didn't have making a reel, printing it. And then that reel, for some reason I had this that was my first animation reel. That reel got me a meeting with Cynthia McLean at SBV, who took me on in 1993, and I have been with them ever since.
Wow. What was your first big role?
My first big audition was because Charles Massey, the agent at the time who was handling this particular project, was in the shower and apparently had an epiphany that he should send me to the callbacks for this series they were doing in the 90s called Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego? And I went in on the callbacks for Ivy, and I booked it, and I was terrified because at the time I could do my voice a little younger and a valley girl. And and every week they'd give you your regular character and one and sometimes two incidentals. And I was like, I'm going to be horrible. They're going to fire me every week. So I jumped into every class I could find. And that's always been my MO, right? Find the people who know how to do this really well, pay them to tell you how to do what they do, and skip ahead in the class. That's always just my favorite model. Yeah.
Can I just say something too about the two of you? Because all seriousness, I feel like I have to pinch myself a little bit on being on this panel with the two of you, because on both sides of the glass in the recording booth, I feel like you're both kind of trailblazers and pioneers in the video game space when it comes to voiceover production. Seriously, Darragh, you started at a time where you developed all of those famous casts and recordings for the Monkey Island series and Grim Fandango and all the Star Wars stuff. And of course, I remember very well, there was an article about you, Jenna, where it was like you were basically the most sought after voiceover talent, and it was something that you were doing every week, if not multiple times a day. When was that article? It must have been, was that maybe 8 or 10 years ago or something like that?
Oh,
you were in everything. I mean, you were doing, not only had you done Knights of the Old Republic, but there was Mass Effect. I mean, there was just so many things that you were doing. What was it like watching, and I'm sorry to play a host role here, but what was it like watching it grow from basically the 90s to, the explosion in the 2000s? Because that's when I started, was right when the PlayStation 2 came out.
Yeah.
Started working on it. But I mean, it went from being this like little boutique industry to basically becoming mainstream. And you guys were both, and oftentimes together, doing that stuff. What was it like, watching it grow like that? And how does it change? How's it changed?
Thank you for the acknowledgement. And I think that probably was the New Yorker thing you might have been referring to.
Yeah.
New Yorker, but I mean, for me, I'll never forget the first game session I did. I was like, what? Because I was used to sequential work, and in games we don't work in sequence. We were like popping around on the timeline like a mad frog. And And I remember being in the session, it was for Carmen Sandiego, and I had to say all the flags, all the countries' names, and I'm an actor. I was like, who am I talking to? What do I want? What's going to be their response? What was the moment before? And I had a couple of questions along those lines, and I could see them going, and I'm like, Jen, just say exactly what they want. And I surrendered in that moment, and that has served me my whole career. And I've been hugely formed by Darragh, by all the other directors that I've worked with, the people who are some of the hugest unsung heroes, to my mind, in pop culture today, honestly, are our voice directors, are you guys, because to me, a lot of pop culture is guided by games right now. Everybody's following that flavor. They're really following that flavor. And you guys set the tone with games. So I'm like, hello, these people over here, they are the ones you should be paying attention to. So
it's funny. I remember being in my interview, and it was my interview for LucasArts, and Jack Sorensen, who was the president of LucasArts at the time, he's like, I don't get it. He's like, how come you came over from Ireland to get into the TV and film business, and he's like, now you want to come up here and be a voice director? He's like, help me out here, and I was like, this is the entertainment business. Like, gaming is the entertainment business, and I think in those early days, people in the industry didn't really view it that way. Whereas for me as a kid, there was a game that I used to play called Elite, and Elite was this like sort of vector graphic spacefaring game where you had your ship and you could fly to all these different planets, and like by today's standards, you go look at those graphics and people today be like, what the heck is that?
That was David. Oh, what's his last name? It's Frontier.
Frontier, yeah.
We met him. We worked on Thrillville together with him.
Thrillville, yeah. And so I remember as a kid playing that game, pretending that I was Han Solo. And so for me, gaming and movies, like from a really young age, were kind of one of the same. So then when I was playing, I remember, there's a period of time where I didn't play games. And then I played X-Wing. And again, it was bringing the movies and gaming. I was always a gamer. And so it was just one of those things where for me, it was always the perfect fit. And I just always had that sense of this is the future of storytelling. And you look at what we're doing, I was just down and, finally for the first time in 2 years, I was just down in LA there 2 weeks ago, back on the PCAP stage, directing. And it's like, you see what companies are doing, like Naughty Dog and the visual fidelity of the cinematics and the in-game and like, at Call of Duty or whatever. It's like, it's mind-boggling. And I mean, it's for me, it's the future of storytelling.
That's such a great point. And that's something from an acting perspective. I pinch myself that I've gotten to be in the business in the way that I am in it at this point in time, because there's been such an evolution, even from, you take a trilogy like Mass Effect, because it spanned a significant period of time, and it just happened to kind of sit over this distinctly noticeable change from my perspective, which is that when we did the first one, the technical side was such that the acting still was just slightly pushed, just a little bit. Just want to push it a little so the things would land, right? And by the time we got to the third one, we could do my favorite kind of acting, which is the film acting stuff, where, in the words of Michael Caine, thought registers on camera and thought registers on the mic. And you just have to snuggle into your imaginary world and live something, and you're there. And that's all it takes. And just the authenticity of it, which I think, the power of this medium as an entertainment medium, and the possibility of it as just a tool in the world, blows my mind. Because people when they binge a show, they're going to spend a lot of hours in that show, but they're passive. And in the medium that we're living in now in gaming, they're active. They're co-creating the story. They're becoming that game, an inhabitant of that world, much more so than they are in film and TV.
Yeah. It's funny. I do a podcast about this, about the time spent in movies versus video games. I do a podcast called The Soundtrack Show. Shameless plug. I'm sorry, but one of the things that I talk about is this exact this Skills Hub. There you go. Brought to you by Jennifer Hale. I talked about Super Mario Brothers and how there's only about 4 minutes of music in that entire game. If you actually add up the time, yet people played it, for years. Probably at least, on an average of 30 to 40 hours. And they sold, something like 40 million copies of the thing. So you want to talk about the power of, a couple minutes of music and how it gets stuck in your head and becomes part of the culture. That is exactly right with video games, is that the amount of time and the interactivity of it just makes it so much more, you go to bed thinking about it or dreaming about it. When I was a kid playing Legend of Zelda, I was just trying to figure out, even when I was, trying to get out of bed in the morning going, what if I went that way instead? Or, where I didn't check behind that tree, if I try and use the candle, like it's such a different, it is such a different medium. It is not entirely passive. You're involved. I love that.
I have a weird side question for each of you guys, because I know you're a parent. David, are you a parent as well?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I have two kids.
So I think about my kid, and I think about how games climb into our brains, and then I also think about the behavior of the Borg in the last few years, where all the analytics are dialed to take over, hijack your dopamine receptors. But as people, because I'm not a gamer, like I suck at it. I have spent a lot of time doing them, and I'd have no life if I was an intense gamer as well. What's your perspective as a parent about gaming and about how consuming gaming can be, and where do you guys stand on that?
In
terms of kids? Go ahead, Darragh.
Yeah.
So it's a real challenge because gaming can kind of become addictive, and so I think it has to be monitored. Just sort of anecdotally, we moved during the pandemic. We moved from the Oakland Hills to the other side of the hills, and at a time where our kids were both going into, my daughter was going into middle school, and my son was going into 4th grade, and it was all over Zoom, and it was in both their cases, it was kids that they had no idea who these kids were. Recently, when they went back to school for the first time, all of a sudden my son started, he had been playing Fortnite before, and then he completely just stopped cold turkey. And one day I walked in on him and he was playing Fortnite and he was chatting with somebody, and I was like, oh, who are you chatting with? And it was all the boys from his class. And so after a year of our kids being at home, not having any friends, having zero contact with people, gaming has kind of allowed them to connect. And so now, they've been in school, a couple months now. Now he's got a whole host of friends, and he's, it's night and day compared to this time last year. But that being said, if you were to allow him, he could spend all 12 hours a day in his room playing games. So so there's definitely a balance that needs to be found.
Yeah, my kids are too young, really. I mean, I have one of those classic little Nintendo minis, and I've watched them stumble their way through, a lot of games like Excite Bike and things like that. But they're really too young to do much more than just, puzzle games and things like that. But they're learning tools, and I always think that, I remember when I started at LucasArts, there was Lucas Learning, and this whole idea of video games and interactive tools in education, I still feel like hasn't completely been solved. I remember playing a game called Rome Total War, which was an RTS, and I played it for hours and hours. And I remember thinking, had I had this when I was in my world history class, in high school or college or where it was, my geography class, I would have aced everything without even trying, because I would have been like, oh yeah, no, I went to Crete. Yeah, I went to Crete, and we started a war. I picked a fight. Yeah, Oh, and then we had to go up to, we had to go over to Germania or whatever. Like that stuff is gold in terms of what you can learn and what you can take in, and it means something to you. It's not in the abstract, because context is everything. I think software and games is great for that stuff when applied. I don't think that we've quite figured out how to monetize applying it, and and how to, and I don't just mean monetize, but I mean, how does it make sense for, education and business, and
how to systematize
how do
it.
you connect the dots? What's the infrastructure there? So I think it's a valuable tool, but I do think, like anything, it can be addictive. There's a dark side to addiction to anything. And so moderation is key in everything. But boy, video games, what an incredible tool for learning and for socialization, like Darragh mentioned.
Yeah, and for the creation of empathy, for playing games where you live in someone else's world, where you this project that I've started, part of the goal of it is to level the playing field for creators everywhere. I was having a conversation with someone we're working with about, if you lived in, let's say, Zambia, and you wanted access to top professionals to help you, guide you through the process of making a game, what that game's going to feel like, if it's true to where you live and the flavors of how you are, versus if you can't do it unless you move to a large world center like London or, Toronto or New York or LA or Vancouver, or, like you kind of lose that local flavor. And empowering people and the possibility of empathy through gaming and gamification is such a powerful tool. No, you're right. Yeah.
And what's interesting now about the games industry, and I'd love to actually steer us, if we could, we have a question from an attendee about, probably get this a lot, but I do think it's important to use our time to address this, if you agree. But do you have any wisdom to impart on those who are just getting their feet into the video game interactive realm? What's kind of your, I guess, what would be our advice for people who are starting out, and what avenues should they pursue?
Well, from an acting perspective, am I allowed to do a shameless plug? That's why I created Skills Hub. Find people who know and are already doing what you want to do, and learn from them in any format you can. Create relationships with people, but please have those relationships be authentic. If you want something from someone, be direct. Don't become their bud because you actually want something. Like, be direct. Say, hey, I would like to learn from you. I know you're busy. What would work for you? Have mentors, multiple mentors. And also, though, reach to the sides. Because the fact is, like, we all started around the same time. And we all came up together. You look at us and, if you're just starting, you'll look at people like us and you'll think, I want to work with them. I want to work with that person and that person. And you might at some point, but your most powerful network is going to be the one sitting right next to you on the boat, right next to you on the ladder. I mean, I met Dave Hayter in 95 when he was a starving actor, and we both worked on the Spider-Man series in the 90s, and we just hit it off. We've been buds ever since. At the time, I was just starting to work, and he didn't have much going on. And then he took a job as an office boy, which he was terrible at, for a friend of his directing a movie. And then he became his friend's driver. And then lo and behold, he started writing scene after scene for this movie that his friend who he was driving around was directing. And in the end, he got sole credit for writing X-Men. Like, wow. We all just, and I have another friend who I knew back in Atlanta, Ray McKinnon, who was an actor who would, who bought a word processor. What? Way back in the early days. And he would, in his spare time, write things, eventually wrote something that didn't get sold. So he turned it into a short, made it with his own money, and won the Academy Award for Best Live Action Short, and went on to create a gorgeous show called Rectify. And, like Ania Vardalos, like who did My Big Fat Greek Wedding, that started as her one-woman show. But the point of that all is that we were all just people doing what we do. And we stayed a community, and we stayed open and connected. And this is the phrase I want to drill into all of your heads out there in listening land and watching land. All boats rise together. There's no such thing as competition. Everybody's got their own flavor. You champion yourself and you champion everyone else.
I really wish someone would have said that to me when I was in school, because I haven't said it nearly as well as you said it, but man, I just agree. So I so agree. There was this cutthroat competition when I was in school that I just found to be counterintuitive to success. And and nowadays, I remember being in a class, and my first day of class, the teacher said, "Okay, I'm going to end early so you can all just get to know each other, because you're going to want to get to know each other, because you're all going to be working together for however many years." That was like an ear training class, that I took, and that's just such good advice. Darragh, what about you? I mean, do you have any advice for people that are starting out?
Yeah, like I think if you're trying to get into like production, if you get your foot in the door, it's like stay humble, work hard, always show up, be reliable. Just all of the basics. But I feel like somebody who was a manager for, the better part of 18 years, the one thing that would drive me crazy would be people who would kind of get their foot in the door, and then they were always immediately like trying to angle to do something else, or expected more. And it's like you got to put in the sweat equity first and foremost, and just be available. And there was a director, I was watching a thing on YouTube recently, and he was kind of saying the same thing. And he was a guy who got a low level position on some film production, and he was be working the food table or whatever, and was sweeping up at the end of the day. And one day it was his day off, and he showed up, and he was like, I just came in to make sure everything was okay. And he worked like that through this first film that he had done. And a couple months later, he gets a call from the director, and he's like, hey, you're a good kid. I got a job for you if you're available. And the guy was like, yeah, I'm available. He's like, great. Turns out they were shooting something in Thailand. He gets on a plane, first class. He's flown to Thailand. He's given his own hotel room. No money was discussed. He didn't even remember whether he actually got paid for the production. But he was brought out there. He gained, another 2 months of experience working for this director. And all of a sudden, 2 months after that, they hire him as like an assistant director, and they're paying him. And it's like, he just was a guy who showed up and did shit. And it's like, sometimes that's the most helpful thing. It's just show up and do shit.
Yeah. That's so good.
That's my advice, people.
So good. And check your ego at the door.
And check your ego at the door. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's almost, talent and all of that is kind of a given. It's really, can someone stand to be in a room locked with you for 12 hours while you're trying to figure something out? And, how do you make yourself invaluable? I mean, I would add to that, another way of saying that is flexibility in terms of your goals. I mean, you moved to LA with a specific purpose, and you and I both, Jen, were both like, really into music, and I was going to be a stage actor or a theater actor or on camera or whatever. I never saw myself working in games because I didn't know it was a possibility, but it led to everything. Working in games, video games, that industry for me has been, led to absolutely everything. And it's a flexibility of like, it almost doesn't matter how you get in the room, get in the room, and what that takes in order to achieve that is not only a great attitude and flexibility, but a willingness to make yourself useful, and because then people think of you, the good ones do, the good mentors, they become your mentors. Like Darragh was my mentor, and just do what needs to be done. You might want to, everyone's got career aspirations and where they want to be. And there has to be a little bit of faith that'll eventually come. Our careers are long, especially if you're starting out and you're right out of college. You got a good 40 years to put in. Your career is going to reinvent itself over decades. So patience and playing a long game is very important. I'm a big believer in internships. I'm a big believer in finding anything that you can do. When I started at Skywalker, I really wanted to be helping out with the score and, moving microphones and operating the tape machine. I was making coffee, that's what I did. And it was the same job I was doing in school to get myself through class, but I turned out I could make coffee and suddenly everyone wanted me around, because I knew how to operate the cappuccino machine that Coppola had gifted the tech building. Anyway, yeah, that would be flexibility.
So just to follow on from that, because there's probably a bunch of actors as part of the group, listening in and watching us. The acting version of making coffee, Jen, I've told you this story before, but I was directing the PCAP on the remake of a game called Mafia, and there's a scene in the game where there's the mobster and the detective, and they're in a cafeteria, like a diner, and this particular scene plays out throughout the sort of 3.5 hours of cinematics that take place over the entire story arc of the main character. They cut to the past, and then they cut to sort of the present day in the diner. And there was a background actor who was going to play 2 different servers in the restaurant. And I was laser focused on the 2 principal actors. And we shot the scene over the course of like 3 days. The first day, and then like 2 days later, we did the sort of second half of it. And so the actor who was playing the servers, I had just kind of told her her basic movements, and that didn't really give her any direction beyond that. We shot the first day where the server was at the end of her shift, and she comes over and she interacts with the 2 people. Scene done, we move on. 2 days later, we go back in, and she's now playing the server who follows the first server. And all of a sudden, I noticed as she's moving around the set as we're shooting the first take, I'm like, she's on kind of the balls of her feet rather than her heels. What I realized was she had played the first server 2 days earlier, flat-footed and tired, and it was a level of sort of physicality that didn't dawn on me at the time, and I certainly didn't give her that direction. But she was thinking for herself and was self-directing, and she was doing me a favor because she was doing my job for me. And I pulled her aside and I was like, Lindsay, were you flat-footed 2 days ago? And she was like, yeah. I was like, you're a genius. And I tell people that story all the time because Lindsay was making the coffee.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, it was the equivalent of making the coffee, and she was just thinking for herself and yeah, bringing it all to the stage. So
I love that story. It's such a good story, and it calls to mind to me what I call the head game, which is that, you know, as freelancers, and performers are all freelancers, you know, and as performers, we're waiting to get picked every day. We go, did I get picked today? Am I paying my rent? You know, or do I go to my other job? And that head game is so important, and it starts with how we talk to ourselves about that. What we do does matter. So let's approach it like every single thing matters. And if no one's going to tell us how to do it, let's approach that like we're grown-ups. Like, no, I'll take responsibility for this. I'll take responsibility for if this isn't working, I'll figure it out. We're problem solvers. I remember when I was a PA, I did that for, I think, a couple years. And I did everything from tie into a giant electrical panel help my boss do it, which essentially was put an extension cord around his waist so I could yank him off if he did it wrong and start to fry, you know, to filing paperwork, to making coffee, to getting dry cleaning, to setting up shots and framing shots and getting things ready for him before the big fancy director came in. He was big fancy for our town, and he was really brilliant. And so then when I was doing a movie of the week where I got to play Rod Steiger's daughter, which was just something. Wow. Oh, that was a thing. Look up Rod Steiger if you don't know him. He was brilliant, and he gave me so many gifts in that shoot. I still benefit from them today. And Dick Lowry was shooting. He did a lot of the Star Trek stuff, and he was with his DP, very frowny faced, and they were standing near me, and I was terrified. I was like still in my teens, and I knew the problem because I'd been on the other side of the camera. So if you're a voice actor, do some editing, you know, do some technical stuff so you understand what's happening. And I knew the issue they were having was framing, because we were shooting at a hospital, and there was all this clutter down the hall that they hadn't cleaned and prepped for the shot. And I just said, excuse me, I'll try again. Excuse me. Oh. I was loud. They noticed me. I said, what if I just kneel down? And by me kneeling down, it changed the angle of the shot and solved all their problems. And the director goes, genius. And I was like, It was terrified, but it really supports the work. But who I was being was a problem solver. And it's not about me. And this is something that I want to bring up for all performers out there, is the topic of validation. We don't become performers necessarily because we come from the greatest, most validating experiences in life, right? And sometimes we will be, and we also, even if you do, you're putting your heart and soul out there, and you would love to hear something back besides this. Or, thank you. You know,
at best, right?
Yeah. Love to hear anything. But you don't. So a huge piece of your job as a performer is self-validation. That doesn't mean self-aggrandizement. Like, you're not the greatest thing since sliced bread. You're great. You need to love yourself more than anyone does, but learn how to leave a room powerfully. Learn how to be complete on a set when, like Lindsay, who did that incredible job, could really invest with pride and be complete. Learn what it is to feel like, no, I'm complete, I'm good. And then if anybody thanks you or acknowledges you, oh, well, that was nice. Just go on your day. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an important point too, because it's not that the advice, is make coffee. That's not it at all. It's actually, you pinpointed it, which is find the greatest need in the room and fill it, make yourself invaluable, not because it's a glorified role, certainly, being a runner or doing those sorts of things, those aren't glorified roles, but they are extremely helpful. And everyone knows what you probably have a goal that's out there. And when it's finally your turn, you're like, oh, well, here's this project I've been working on, or someone's going to lift you up because they just want you around. I got a call to come back and work at Skywalker Sound years after leaving the Lucas companies. And I remember thinking, well, that door is closed. And, because of all of that work, it didn't come back. And, it took, I guess, I started working on my first TV show there in 2018. It took almost 20 years. It took 19 years from when I interned there. Not that everyone's going to take 19 years. I actually think that's an extraordinarily long time. Some people, it happens overnight. That actually does happen. In fact, we got a question here about any different advice you'd give to a 38-year-old beginner voice actor as opposed to someone in their early 20s. I think that's great. Well, first of all, I remember taking classes at the Groundlings when I first moved to LA, and we all become friends on social media. And you see a lot of people come to LA, or they come to the industry, and they find out that it takes a lot of passion, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of, like you said, self-validation. And so you see a lot of attrition as a result. And sometimes success just means being willing to wait until that magic circumstance happens in your career, your life. There is an attrition thing that happens. I sometimes wonder, maybe the two of you, maybe there's more room for an actor, if I decide to be a voice actor in my 60s or something. There's probably more work for me in my 60s and my 70s than there were for me in my 20s, because I felt like I sounded like everybody else in my 20s, and there was probably an army of people submitting demos. So maybe there's even an advantage there that you can find, that you have a unique sound. You've lived your life. You can do things with your voice that you can't necessarily do when you're in your 20s. I don't know. What's your take on it, you guys?
Well, I would add to that, yourself more than you ever did before.
You've lived life. You knew that this is what you want to do, and you started pursuing it, right?
And you know who you are. And that authenticity of who you are is the single greatest asset you own. Like, you and people, myself and all my peers who are in my same general range, can all do the same audition. And I mean, Darragh will speak to this, but they're all going to be excellent. It's a matter of flavor. And you just keep standing there and being your flavor. And I invite you to examine your thinking that's putting you in a box because of your age. Don't put limitations on yourself. I was blessed with the fact that I absolutely despise a limitation. And if you put one in front of me, even if I didn't even care about it, now I have to bust it into shreds. Like, I hate being put in a box. Don't you dare. So, you're welcome to that attitude. Like, just take it. But Darragh can speak to this.
It's funny. I was working with Yuri Lowenthal this morning, and he was like, I'm 50. I played Peter Parker. so
Yep.
Don't get put in a box. And I think that for actors, it's embrace everything, embrace voiceover, embrace theater, embrace on camera. When it comes to voiceover, work on character demos, work on commercial demos, work on sort of narration demos. You got to open yourself up to everything, because you don't know what's going to click and hit. And I think for the person who's 38, just keep pressing forward. You're never too old to get in it. My sister is 53, and she just got her CPA qualification after spending almost a decade putting her kids through school and getting, doing an hour of night school, every evening or whatever. She finally is now a forensic accountant. So
that's no small charge.
So it's never too late. You just gotta put in the work and just get an agent, get auditioning, and keep at it. And you just don't know. Like it's funny. I was working with a guy recently who his name's Peter Lurie, and Peter is the first character that you sort of encounter in Grim Fandango. So I worked with him in 1998 or whatever year that was, and I've never worked with him again until like a month ago. And it was like, holy shit! I was like, how have our paths never crossed in all this time? And he went off and was doing other things, and so you just don't know what's going to happen. Anything could happen at any point. So keep acting, keep doing it, and keep pressing forward.
You reminded me of something too that I wanted to share, which is that, and I am going to mention Skills Hub here because we created something really specific for people there, and in their workout rooms, and there are places where you can go virtually, and you can do this. You don't have to be through Skills Hub, but if you're in a city, find a few actors and you go to a studio and you pay the off hours junior engineer for his time, or you go to a place like our workout rooms and you just meet with fellow actors who want to be doing what you're doing, and you spend a couple hours just working out and giving each other feedback. It builds your skills and it builds community. And there is nothing like the whole 5 minutes a day thing. Like if you worked out once a week or twice, 3 times a month for 4 hours, you'll maybe gain something, but I swear to you, you do about 10 minutes a day, your life will change. And no kidding, even something that small. I have a whole reading out loud protocol that I assign people, and it matters. It matters. And I wanted to add to this conversation, when we want something, when we want to get somewhere, often it's because we want to have that feeling that we're going to get when we get there. And practice having that feeling right now, because we don't know how much time any of us have. We could all get hit by a bus tomorrow. Why spend a minute of your life in a feeling state that sucks? Hold on. They're going to come along that you just couldn't help. And you're like, oh, I'm in the suck place right now. This is awful. And you work your way through it, right? But a lot of us spend a lot of time putting ourselves there because your feelings are created by your thoughts. So start noticing what your thinking is. And we do a lot of time, humans spend a decent amount of time doing what I call daydreaming in the negative, otherwise known as worrying, because all that's fiction. So I would invite you to borrow some of your crappy bad fiction time and spend it in good fiction, and just daydream that you're actually living the life that you dream of now and having that feeling right now. You're going to feel better. You're going to have the character of a human that we've all been describing as the people that we enjoy being around. And it doesn't matter if it's true or not, because I for one, don't subscribe to the fact that pessimism is realistic. I think optimism is one of the bravest things one of the bravest perspectives you can operate from in the world.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many like directors, producers that I've kind of encountered in my life who they just have the courage to go out and do something. They went out, they like you were talking earlier on, somebody made a short and turned into an Academy Award. They're not always the most talented people. They have the optimism to go out and do something. And that is so true. It's like if you're pessimistic, you're not going to do anything because you're going to be afraid to take a chance and do something and put yourself out there. Whereas if you're optimistic by nature, yeah, you're gonna succeed. Yeah, because you're gonna do stuff.
Yeah, manifesting opportunities is a real thing, and and you don't always know if you're stumbling into it. It's just I realized later that he was, I think it was a Buddhist philosophy, but I didn't know it at the time. But I had a drum instructor at Berkeley that told me to have a seeking spirit. I was expecting him to show me how to do a paradiddle a little bit better, but instead he was like, have a seeking spirit. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he goes, you walk into a room and you need to be looking for all of the different energy in the room and the different opportunities and the different people's different desires and the dynamics and the energy, have a seeking spirit. And he made me write it down. And it's a testimony to that I haven't forgotten it. And that was in 1998, 97, something like that. But you manifest these opportunities. Speaking of which, I did have a question for you guys, because there do seem to be a lot of voice actors or, people that are interested in voiceover on this call, which makes sense considering the company. But I wanted to ask you guys about auditions, especially because you're coming from two very different places that are essentially the two places that meet in the booth. Starting just with my story, and then I just want to pass it over to you, which is I had two stories. One as an actor and one as a director. As a director, I was shocked watching Darragh, and not in a bad way, but describe and then have this experience myself using, I think we were using Voice Bank at the time. I don't remember what we were using, but how quickly you have to go through dozens, if not hundreds of auditions, and what would catch your ear. That was a revelation to me. On the other side of things, because I was in sound, because I was a Pro Tools jockey, and because I had microphones and all that, I spent way too much time editing my own stuff, recording a performance ad nauseum, piecing things together, thinking that I was making it infinitely better, where maybe I was making it marginally better, but oftentimes probably inadvertently making it worse. And until I realized that when you're a musician and you go out and gig at night, you're not playing that lick that you're working on in the practice room. You're doing the stuff that you're not thinking about anymore, right? It's conscious incompetence, or it's unconscious competence, if sort of the scale of, unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, and then conscious, and then when you unconsciously know how to do something and just be great, you're getting your auditions off of your desk and you're going and walking the dog and living your life or whatever. You need to do it so fast, almost as fast, it seems to me, as directors are listening to it, yet you want to catch their ear. What's your advice about auditioning for actors? That's really what I've said my piece, but I'm just so curious to hear from you guys.
Listening.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I have, yeah. So yeah, for those of you out there, I think David watched in horror back in the day when auditions came in, and I would click on somebody and they would say their name. They would do, they would slate, and they would get like maybe 2 sentences in, maybe, and then I'd turn them off and go on to the next person. And I think he was like, "What the heck? You gave him 15, 20 seconds." And that's kind of the reality of it. Is like when you're going through, let's say you put out a new project, you've got like 30, 40 characters that you're getting auditions for, and for each character you get like 600 auditions, and you got to start. It takes a long time to move through all of those auditions, especially if you're listening to the whole thing. So my process is to listen to the first little bit of an audition and see, are they in the wheelhouse or not, just tonally. And if they are, I move them into a bin, and then I go through that bin and have a more critical listen later on. The one sort of part that's sort of bad about doing it that way is that in the old days when auditions came in on audio tapes, you were kind of forced to listen to the entire audition, because if you try to fast forward, you probably miss the beginning of the next person. So what would happen in the old days with audio tapes is somebody might not be right for a role, but you'd be forced to listen to them anyway. And so you would then kind of get to know them, and you'd be like, oh, they're not right for this role, but they're a good actor, and I like their instincts. And so then the next time their name pops up in front of you, you remember them. Whereas, as I described today, it's a much different process. So the best advice I can give you, and Kath Susay is the master at it, and she will take audition copy and she'll make a small adjustment at the top of it, and she'll make it her own, and just do a little ad lib that's sort of, it is a quality add to the audition. And I once asked her, I said, are you not worried that maybe the person listening to your auditions is the writer? And she said, yeah. She's like, I don't worry about that, because she's like, I'd rather stand out from the crowd most of the time, or all of the time, and run the risk of offending somebody, every so often. So with her auditions, they're always like that. There's always something that makes her pop from everybody else. And so my advice is, when you're auditioning, make a small adjustment, make it your own, make it better. And that's it.
Oh, Kath is the master. I never forget the first time I worked next to her. My jaw dropped and I was just like, oh my God, she's not a loud human. She comes into a room and her energy and everything about her is quiet. Her presence is very clear. And her acting, like, to this day, moves me to tears. I aspire to one day be anywhere near in the same league as Kath. I mean, good God. Yeah, I recently I've been asked to cast and be on the voice directing team for a huge project that's in the works. And so I have stepped into, I was casting in a round of callbacks. So I didn't have 200 or 300 to listen to, but I have a really busy life, and it was insane to me. Like it was instant for me. I played these takes, and if it was inauthentic or acted, nope, bye. I was like, wow, you're harsh. I'm like, yep. I can't handle untruth. I can't handle someone lying at me or acting at me. I can't take it. I can't. And there were some people who were really good and hit all the beats. So they made it into my short pile, but I told the team, I was like, all right, so listen, what lifts a project is if the actor's having an experience, the person playing the game gets to have an experience. Like when you watch a movie or something, or a TV show or anything, and you see an actor performing something really incredible, like usually intense or like out there or difficult, and you watch and you're like, wow, they really did some work, versus you watch them and you can't speak. Like, that's the acting that cuts through. That's what lifts projects. And so that was my, it's a high bar, but okay, here's a brief story. I remember when I first started, it took me a long time to not criticize myself for being an actor. I don't know why. Just, cultural shame, I guess. I don't know. But I began to really like drill down and go, I wish I was good at this. I just remember couple decades ago, just flogging myself because I wasn't good enough at this. And I fortunately, the smarter me stepped in and smacked myself upside the, metaphorical head and went, hey, shut up. Check back in 20 years. That's when you have a right to ask this question. In the meantime, just do your job. Get over yourself. And I was like, okay, cool. Okay, got it. And I feel like in that time, my skills have come to a point where I'm really confident. I'm like, yeah. So give yourself that time. Give yourself that timeline and that grace. And that actually leads to a question on here, which is, if you could tell your past self something now, what would it be? You guys, what would you tell your prior self? Yeah.
Darragh, do you want to start? Is this our last question?
I think, yeah, it should be actually. Well, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, if I could go back in time, I would tell myself, number one, stop beating up on yourself. It's stupid and a waste of time. It's a terrible habit. Knock it off. Number two, you're more than enough. Number three, have a good time. And I'm going to steal one more from Walt Gray. He said the greatest thing. We did an interview for Skills Hub the other day, and he said, take the compliment. I was like, oh,
that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel like, a big one for me is learning how to rid yourself of fear. Because fear on the microphone, it's funny, if you're performing or I remember I was doing the red carpet for the Star Wars premieres, and they brought me in to do that. And I've got, it's so loud, and I've got this IFB in my ear, and there's a producer in the production truck yelling, and I'm thinking, I've been on stage so many times, I've been in front of a microphone so many times, and I was so nervous. It was live, it was big, whatever. And I just remember thinking to myself, you always tell your former self to be less afraid. Mm-hmm. So think about yourself in 10 years now, and don't be afraid. enjoy this because it's going to be over like that. And when I did that, it really, you know, that absence of fear really worked out, really worked out. And it's funny because if you have fear in the moment, it robs you of everything, all of your facilities, everything, all of your training, all of your creative impulses, they're gone because all you can think about is fear. It's crippling. It's debilitating. And I remember Bob Iger, you know, who was the chair of Disney at the time, came behind me while I was doing some online poll, you know, and in my ear, it's like, we don't have any questions prepared, but Bob Iger is behind you. Keep it general, da, da, da. And I just turn on, hey, Bob Iger, and I just have a conversation, and these questions float out of me. And I watched it the next day, and I had a delayed panic attack, realizing I could have gone so wrong, but it didn't. And it was the absence of fear. And if, you know, I try and think that through the years when I've made some, you know, Darragh used to always say, fortune favors the bold, which was, you know, the title of my goodbye email to LucasArts. And I misspelled fortune, which is really funny. My wife I was typing it like so emotional. Anyway, letting go of fear. The one last other piece of advice I got was when I was a student, which is, you know, try and picture yourself. The other side of that is try and picture yourself in the roles that you want, in, you know, having the life that you want, having the career that you want, and carry yourself as that person now as much as you can, you know. And as a 20-something, when I first heard someone say that to me, that was really powerful. Imagine yourself a middle-aged person having the life that you dream of. Be that person now, you know, will it into existence. You know, I mean, we only have so much control, but you can manifest these things, and usually it's fear. You can open yourself up to windows of opportunity when they arrive if you're too afraid to not just take them but see them. So I would say that.
Yeah, well, so you kind of stole my thunder, David, because as Jennifer was, no, it's fine. As Jennifer was talking, I was thinking, yeah, I think like bravery and you know, it's funny because I took a lot of risks in my career, so I don't know that I kind of really had fear, but I definitely, you know, I was at Lucas a long time and probably too long. You know, I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything, but it was. I often kind of look back and think, well, you know, if I was a little braver, you know, what would have happened? What would I have done? I don't know. I still wouldn't change it because it was an amazing experience. But so I'm gonna instead of bravery, I'm gonna steal Pat Fraley's advice. So Pat Fraley was getting his master's degree in acting in Australia, of all places. And one day, it was coming to the end of the class. The professor said, "Patrick, if you wouldn't mind, can you please wait behind?" So Pat got, you know, kind of hung out, and the teacher kind of ignored him until the room cleared out. And the teacher looks up and he's like, "Patrick, you have to be awfully good to be an asshole." And Patrick was like, "Oh," like he didn't know what he had done, but but the point was made. And
oh,
wow!
What a great teacher
So I think when you're whether you're an actor or, you know, in production, and it goes back to the advice that I was giving earlier on. It's like you got to be there to make the coffee, sweep the floors, you know, be flat-footed, and I guess it just goes back to being humble and hardworking. And I think that the best it's stupid advice because it's obvious advice, but it's like really in any capacity, being humble and hardworking and thinking on your feet goes a long way. You know, goes a really long way. So yeah,
it's such a perfect note to close on, I think.
Yeah, and Darragh, I stole your answer. So you know, my answer came from you.
I forgot that I used to say that.
You're like, you're my mentor, as I said. You know, I remember, I'm like, Darragh, man, how do we do all the cool things we do? You know, so I watched you. You know, I learned it from watching you. But thank you, and I miss you guys so much.
Yeah, I miss you guys as well.
After 6.
Yeah, we'll have to one of these days we'll have to hopefully get together in person.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Catch up and
yeah. And thanks to Halp for this. Thank you so much, Halp.
Yeah.
Everybody out there, everybody who's out there, please you can find us in all our respective places. And thank you for being here. And you matter. Remember that. And also, it's no big deal. Lighten up and have a good time.
Where can people find you besides Twitter? And do you want to just do a plug before we leave?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm at acting.skillshub.life.
There it is.
Yes, acting.skillshub.life. Woo! And if you're coming from Halp, if you put in the code HALP, HALP, you will get 30% off, or 20% off. I think some percentage off for 3 months. So there's a discount. There's a Halp discount. So if it's something that ends up being a fit for you, please make sure you use the Halp code. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, by the way, I don't know where you guys are seeing all the questions, but that's okay. I can be found on LinkedIn or at Skills Hub. Skills Hub, I probably won't be on Skills Hub for probably December, just because I'm booked. But email is a terrible place to get a hold of me because my inbox is a train wreck. But LinkedIn, I will check usually like once a month, because I'll get one of those emails where somebody's looking at you, and I'm too vain to let that go. So I'm like, oh, who's checking me out?
See, so I hide. I'm like,
so then I'll go to LinkedIn and I'll be like, oh, there's a message here. And so I respond to people on LinkedIn much easier than I do on email. So just Darragh O'Farrell on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And David, where are you? How can we find you?
At David W. Collins on Twitter and Instagram is the best way, and you can listen to me prattle on about promoting all my nonsense. There's that. I also have my podcast called The Soundtrack Show with iHeartRadio. If you're a fan of Star Wars, please check out Star Wars Visions or Star Wars: A Bad Batch, some of my more recent projects. But I am so happy to meet people online, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity for the Halp Network. And I miss the folks at the Halp Network too. I haven't seen Chip and Julia for a long time. So thanks, you guys.
Yeah, this is
David, we love The Bad Batch. Just
sweet.
My God, so do we. So, and I can't say any more than that. So do we.
I'm so glad.
I'm always texting Dee going, I love you, Dee. You're so brilliant. I love you, Dee. And he's like, oh,
so brilliant. So brilliant.
It's actually, it's the one thing people always are like, oh, do your kids love like Star Wars? Are they like, are they so into everything that you do? I'm like, they could care less. The only thing that they like is The Bad Batch.
Oh, so, that's great. That's great to hear. Yeah. Yeah, and started in the middle of the pandemic. I had to start working from home like everyone else. Amazing.
So good.
Yeah.
I did a show that we won't speak of years ago we had 36 episodes in the can and done when the ownership transfer took place, and I'm still crossing my fingers to find out if that show will ever see the light of day. Wow. It's all I will say is Seth Green was involved, and it was in the universe. I don't know, but yeah, David's doing eyebrows.
I don't know. Well, no, I know nothing. I have no power. So
okay.
I'm flattered if you think that I do, but I know I just am eyebrowing because I know what show you're talking about.
You do? Okay, good. I'm I wish that would come out. It was the funnest thing in the world to do. Yes.
Always in motion is the future.
Right? Yeah. Yes. All right. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thanks, Halp Network.
Thank you, Halp.
Thanks, everybody.